when John moves up to chair, who moves up to vice chair? I think it's Robert, but, or it could be Joe, you know, I wanted to make sure with him, but I think it's Robert.
I think it's Robert too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we
I
vote?
think it's you.
Is it whoever's been here the longest, or?
None of us have been.
No, they rewrote the rules a year or so ago. It's interesting.
Okay.
It's been a couple of years, actually,
Yeah.
but it basically says that, if you move to chair, you have had to have been vice chair.
Oh,
But he's only been, what, 2 months?
Mhm.
3 months vice chair.
Yeah.
And then, the others should move up, the newer people first. So if you've been chair before, you kind of go to the bottom of the list. They want everybody to get some experience.
Yeah. And so then Robert will be named vice chair also tonight.
I believe so, yeah.
So shall we wait till this attorney shows up, or should we?
Let's wait till 6:05. Let's just, we've done that before, just waited 5 minutes.
Oh, microphone.
Thank you. We'll call to order the Planning Commission meeting of Tuesday, March 20th, 2018. Have a roll call?
Commissioner John Dinan,
Here.
Commissioner Joan Stewart, Commissioner Robert Ball,
Here.
Commissioner Melissa Hughes, and Commissioner Mallory Finrich. I was told.
Any Planning Commission member or staff who has a direct conflict of interest in any scheduled agenda item to be considered is to declare that conflict at this time. Any conflicts? Okay. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda and within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Planning Commission Board. Individual comments will be limited to a maximum of 5 minutes per person, and each person may speak once during this time. Time cannot be yielded to another person. Under state law, matters presented during the public comment period cannot be discussed or acted upon. For record purposes, please state your name and city of residence. Please make your comments directly to the Planning Commission Board. Are there any public comments at this time? Hearing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. All items listed on the consent calendar are to be acted upon by a single action of the Planning Committee Board unless otherwise requested by an individual Planning Commission member for special consideration. Otherwise, the recommendations of staff will be accepted and acted upon by roll call vote. Any commissioners have any concerns or want to overrule that? So we'll go with a roll call vote. Item 2.1, get a motion, and item 2.2, and item 2.3.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve items 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3.
Okay. Commissioner Dynan?
Aye.
Commissioner Stewart?
Yes.
Commissioner Ball?
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes? And Commissioner Fenrich?
Moving on to Planning Commission procedures, item 3.1, nomination and appointment of new chair and vice chair per Planning Commission rules and procedures. And we also want to welcome the new commissioner and alternate commissioner. And I see an attorney.
Okay, city attorney has arrived. Yeah, that's all right.
Sorry, everyone, the RFP meeting next door ran a little bit longer than I thought.
Okay, so we've gone through the consent calendar.
Okay.
And now we have planning commission procedures where we have to have our vice chair move to chair. And we have new commissioners to welcome as well.
Perfect. I'll let you do all that and I get set up.
Okay. So per planning commission rules, when the planning commission chair steps down, the planning commission vice chair shall move up into that position. Welcome, Mr. Dynan, and thank you for opening the meeting and getting us going on this. And we have new commissioners. I'm sorry. So then the vice chair for the person who has been on the commission the longest yet has not held this position before would be Mr. Ball. And so are you willing, to accept the vice chair position?
Yes.
Thank you. And we would like to welcome our two new commissioners, Miss Melissa Hughes and Miss Mallory Fenrich. And then, so everybody knows everybody. Now we also have alternate commissioner, spaced out his name, Steve Link. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining us. Okay. Don't think until we have another opening with chair or vice chair that we need to draw straws for the new people to see who would be moving up next. So we'll go ahead and do that at a future meeting date. Okay, thank you.
Item 4, public hearing presentations. Item 4.1, zoning ordinance amendment number 2018-01. The project consists of a proposed amendment to Title 15, Land Usage, Chapter 153, Single Family Residential District, R1, concerning personal escape ramps in residential yards.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Let's see here. There we go. So in September, staff brought forward ordinance amendments to the residential zoning code for planning commission review. And part of that was the requirement of a CUP, a conditional use permit, to regulate skate ramps in residential yards. While most of the amendments were recommended to City Council for approval, the Planning Commission pulled the language that was added concerning those skate ramps in order to continue to the discussion. As the rest of the amendments moved on to City Council, they were made aware of what language had been included and was removed by the Planning Commission. So when we talk about skate ramps, what are we talking about? Here's a couple examples of, well, number one, the dark colored skate ramp in the rear is kind of the impetus for this amendment. It is in a residential rear yard in our R1 zoning district in the city, and it's being used late at night, there's music, there's a lot of skaters on there, and some of the neighbors are feeling a loss of privacy. There's noise and lights, and it's becoming an impact to the neighborhood. The smaller ramp, I believe, is a newer ramp that the gentleman who constructs those ramps was in the process of making that one. Here's one that's across the driveway and sidewalk of the property. Here's one similar one out in the street, maybe waiting for a pickup. Here's some smaller but taller skate ramps. And then this is the backyard of a city residence, and you can see just past the fence there, not about even with the pool, is a very large skate ramp, and I believe there's actually somebody standing on it or using it right behind those tree branches. So if the Planning Commission were to consider requiring a conditional use permit for skate ramps in residential yards, this is some of the language that had been pulled from the amendments ordinance earlier this year. So what would be included in the code would be F, half pipes and similar structures. Every proposed half pipe or similar structure shall be of a scale and design and constructed of materials that will minimize noise, vibration, and other nuisance factors commonly associated with half pipe usage. Portions of the half pipe may be located below ground, but in no case shall any portion of the half pipe exceed 6 feet in height above the ground level, excluding handrails. Hours of operation shall be from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Lighting is prohibited. And I should mention that this conditional use permit language came from the code for the city of Salt Lake City. Staff had been asked to do additional research into ordinances and possibly other noisy uses in residential rear yards, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of it out there. So I had to go beyond California into some other states. So number 2 of that CUP requirement would be walls, fences, hedges, trees, or other screen plantings shall be installed sufficient to ensure harmony with adjacent properties and to conceal any unsightly development. No commercial or advertised use of the half pipe shall be permitted, and no donations or contributions shall be solicited or received for use or attendance at half pipe activities. Part 3, the proposed half pipe shall comply with all pertinent sections of the Uniform Building Code and all zoning requirements, including side and rear yard setbacks, minimum of 6 feet from other structures, lot coverage, and size regulations for accessory structures. What the size regulations mean, if you are constructing an accessory structure in your rear yard and it's 120 square feet or larger, you are required to have a building permit. So the skate ramp could be measured, and in fact, when we first received a complaint about the offending skate ramp, we did go out there, measured it, and treated it as an accessory structure, and looked at setbacks and height, but didn't have any other language to regulate it. For purposes of this section, half pipe means a smooth surfaced outdoor structure shaped like a trough and used in gravity extreme sports such as skateboarding, freestyle, BMX, or inline skating. Now, like I said, this is the language that I brought in from Salt Lake City, but I do know that one of our commissioners has also found some information. So when we get to the discussion portion, if he wishes to bring that information forward and either discussion to add it or change some of the CUP language, we could have that conversation tonight. A second option would be to ban personal skate ramps rather than using the CUP process to regulate them. Several of the cities that I did research just did an all-out ban on them, so they didn't have to deal with the regulation portion. One of the, I guess, kind of a downside is if a person is in approval of skate ramps and having kids in your backyard, so they're not out running the neighborhood. Conditional use permit can be fairly expensive. I think I've determined it's about $2,600 should a person decide to move forward and get one permitted for their rear yard. And then the third option would be non-regulation. Maybe you feel that skate ramps and pools and basketball hoops are just part of kids growing up and backyard activities, and you might feel the regulation of them is unnecessary and choose not to regulate them. So the overarching goal for the environment presented in our general plan is to ensure that noise does not substantially reduce the quality of urban life. Should you choose to go with some conditional use permit language, you can say that it would meet one of the goals of the general plan, which is a requirement for adding amendments to an ordinance. As far as the California Environmental Quality Act is concerned, the proposed amendment, it is an amendment, and so it is not a project according to CEQA, so we don't have to be concerned about making CEQA findings here. So that's what my presentation is. This is a public hearing, so, and we do have audience members who may want to speak, and then we can open and close public hearing, and then you can discuss what you would like to do. Thank you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Donna. Is there any questions from the commission at this point? Okay, are there any members of the audience who would like to make comments on this subject?
Had a lot of impact on my quality of life as far as using my backyard. As you can see, I have a swimming pool in the backyard. During the summer, there's teenage boys up on that ramp. They're standing on top of the ramp, looking down in my backyard. People are just not comfortable with even swimming in my pool anymore. It's the noise is coming from the wheels going up and down the ramp and sliding across the top. It's pretty annoying, and I would appreciate you guys to do something about this. We've been discussing this now for going on 2 years. And that's all I got to say. Thanks.
Any other comments from the audience? Hearing none, it's time for discussion. I've got a couple of questions. The proposals that I've seen so far kind of deal with the backyard. Is there any regulation with people just throwing up a half pipe out in the street in front of the house? Or can that be regulated?
Well, that is city property, a city right-of-way in the street and on the sidewalk, and we would prohibit that like we do basketball hoops. When we get a complaint of a hoop out in the street, we do send code enforcement out to have it removed, and this would apply as well. In the front yard, we don't allow accessory structures, so if we treat it like an accessory structure, it would not be allowed in the front yard, and the side yards are fairly pretty narrow anymore to accommodate something like this.
Any other questions from any of the commissioners?
I did some looking on the.
Hey, Mike.
It's on. I did some looking over the weekend at some of the regulations in the muni codes throughout the United States, and there wasn't a whole lot of regulations addressing them. The cities that did do the conditional use permits seemed to be more geared towards cities that didn't have skate parks, which Riverbank has a skate park. So aside from the wording that's in this proposal, a lot of the guidelines were very, very similar. The only real difference was one was an hour after sunup and an hour before sundown. but they were predominantly on cities that did not provide current skate parks.
So I guess my general comments would be looking at the general plan and looking at what it was saying regarding noise. A lot of it seemed like it was in more of an attention to limit noise from external, city mandated factors, not necessarily noise coming from your neighbors. So I did have a question about whether or not that was really the intent of what was in the general plan. I would say the only other thing would be, what are the general rules? Because obviously there is some, regulation or ordinance within the city and in terms of noise in general. So I mean, at what point in general is our noise ordinance for anything going on outside?
Okay. We do have a noise element in our general plan, and there is a chart there that talks about noise levels from ambient noise all the way up to jet planes. In our city, if we were to get a call, say 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and somebody was complaining about noise, we do have a little noise meter that our code enforcement or neighborhood improvement officer could take out to the site, and she would stand at the property line and gauge the noise. Unfortunately, a lot of this tends to happen in evenings and on weekends when we don't have city staff around to be able to use that piece of equipment. I think you would need, I don't recall the exact noise levels in the general plan. I don't have that with me right now, but I want to say that 65 decibels is about what normal life in a city tends to fall. And I think it's up around 80 or 90 where you would have the higher noise levels, like from airplanes and trucks and trains and that type. I'm not sure what a skate ramp noise would peg out at the property line. She would have to probably do it from the front sidewalk, which she would have the house and the fence. It would probably limit some of the noise coming out, or if she got permission to go in the person's backyard and stand at the side property line, she could measure there too. To be honest, we haven't been called out to measure those noises.
Gotcha.
Hey, Donna, is there any qualified information that reflects an impact of property value to neighboring properties?
I don't have any collected data samples on that. I did speak with a realtor. We were actually talking about another project, and he was complaining about trash and stuff in the neighbor's yard, and I asked him what he thought the impact of having a skate ramp in a backyard would be on a house that he was selling maybe next door, and he said he didn't even want to think about it. So he didn't, that's the only answer he gave me.
Okay, because I know me personally, when we bought in Crossroads, we turned down a house in Turlock because there was a ramp next door. So I was just wondering if there's a history or something.
Well, it sounds like from a realtor perspective and your own personal perspective, there might be some impact, but how we can measure that, I'm not sure.
Are these permanent structures?
It could,
Are these permanent structures? These skate ramps?
well, they can be dismantled, but I think it would take some time for the person to dismantle them. They're not, I don't believe they're bolted to the cement. They're just very large and heavy structures that once they get placed there, they tend to sit there for a while.
I think something else I think is a little relevant to the conversation as well that I'd like to bring up is just that by choosing whether or not to live in an area that does or does not have an HOA, I think that has a lot of perks and disadvantages depending on which side it is, and I think that's kind of something you take into consideration when purchasing a home. So I think that's a little relevant to the general idea.
So that an HOA document may contain restrictions that would make it unnecessary for the city to have these type of regulations.
Well, just generally, I mean, I live in an area that doesn't have an HOA, and there are things that I don't like that are not an ordinance, and because we have no HOA, there's no control, but I also don't pay the dues. So for me, it's a worthwhile exchange.
Is there any history with the police department on calls concerning disturbing the peace?
Well, I believe that these particular neighbors have had calls into the police department against each other, and it's sometimes digresses to, your overwatering or, your newspapers. I'm just kind of throwing out those examples, but
Back and forth.
there does appear to be some back and forth with it.
Staff have a recommendation on the different alternatives?
I have mixed feelings about it. For one, I can see the general distress and pain that some neighbors are going through having to deal with that in their neighborhood, and it would make sense to be able to regulate it to help them on that end of it. On the other hand, we are a small, very small planning department, and conditional use permits do take a lot of time to process. But I think in the end, when you do issue a conditional use permit, there's been a lot of thought into the conditions of approval that can, help you if the offending neighbor violates that. Then it makes it a little bit easier to open up a code enforcement case and pursue that. But then there's also the cost involved for the neighbor who wants the skate ramp. That's $2,600 is a pretty high price to feel like this is my backyard. I can do what I want. We get a lot of that at City Hall. People don't like to be told what they can and can't do in their backyards. So I guess I personally have mixed feelings about it, and that's why I gave you the choices that I did.
Yeah, I think we're probably all in that same situation because the one neighbor can't really enjoy his backyard because the other neighbor is enjoying his backyard. And I think that when you have single-family homes, that's probably just an everyday problem. I'm just wondering if perhaps the city could waive the regulations regarding the height of the fence between those two homes. I believe now it's what, at 6 feet? Is that the maximum height?
What's that? Oh. Well, we could go to 7 foot, and then if they wanted to go to 8 foot, they would have to get some engineering and a building permit to do that.
I just wonder if that would perhaps do a
Well,
bit.
Another thing that just occurred to me that I didn't think of when we were writing the staff report is our lots are getting a lot smaller. Many of the lots now are in the 4,500 or 5,000 square foot range. I think, when I was growing up, it was more like 8 or 10,000 square foot big lots. There's also the possibility, if you choose to do a conditional use permit, to maybe that use the size of the property as a factor as well. You could prohibit it if it's less than 6,000 feet, just using that number for an example, or maybe allow it with the conditional use permit on the larger lot. There's many options out there. You could also, think about this some more, maybe do a little bit more of your own research, and we could bring it back and, tweak the language if you want to do the conditional use permit. So we have many options tonight.
I mean, I don't know if this is a fact, but to me, doing a conditional use permit is effectively banning it because I don't know a lot of people who are going to pay $2,600, especially when looking at the information that was sent over that the ramps themselves are only like $500 or $600. So I kind of see if we're doing that, that's essentially a ban. But I mean, I kind of see it as a slippery slope as well. I worry that going into skate ramps and going into people's backyards and then, where does it stop? I feel like that opens up an argument for almost anything to be banned that a neighbor has a problem with. So I do worry about that.
Well, just a reminder that you're actually not approving an ordinance amendment, but you're recommending approval or denial or banning to the city council. That could also come with the recommendation of, we feel that, and this is just an example, we feel that this use would require a conditional use permit, but we feel that the current fees are too steep, and so maybe we recommend $1,000 for a skate ramp CUP. Not the city council could decide, yeah, you're right, let's go with the
That-
smaller fee, or they could go with the larger fee.
Would that cover the cost of the city to actually orchestrate through a permit? Because I mean, I wouldn't want the city to be paying for it, but
Hmm.
$2,600 is also a lot of money.
It wouldn't quite, no.
Okay.
The fees that are established are based off of the cost. So anything that's different or a deviation from that, you could expect to be subsidized by the general fund.
Okay.
Now, that's a question I was gonna ask. What's the impact, or is there a projected impact on a CUP for this on city resources? So as far as staffing, the permit, the documentation process, the approval, the code enforcement officer, the verification process, the complaint handling, all of those instances where the city's involved, is there an approximation of what that impact would be?
Well, it would be $2,600.
To process the CUP, if you're asking the question, so irrespective of whether or not you have a CUP process or not, you will get calls about people having skate ramps in their backyard. So there'll always be some level of enforcement that will exist regardless of your regulatory system. The CUP process would pay for itself. That's how the fees are set. So we anticipate that that's the cost of staff time to take it through the process and pay for itself, not have it be subsidized by the general fund. But even if you were to, regardless of what you do, there'll be a code enforcement element that will still exist. Whether it's a ban, whether it's a conditional use permit, or whether or not you don't change anything. Okay. And then my second question was, yes, everybody's entitled to their backyard and their activities and trampolines, basketball, whatever that's going to be happening. But at what point does one's backyard activity encroach on the availability of the neighboring resident as well? So I know for me personally, if I had somebody standing on the fence hours on end, I'd be very uncomfortable.
No. I mean, just because I had thought about that as well, that I wouldn't really want people looking into my backyard, and then I realized that all of my neighbors are 2 stories and can all see into my backyard anyway, so.
Yeah, but how and I agree with that argument, but I have 2 stories also. But seldom ever do I see a face peering back at me. And again, that's, you're talking 4 or 5, X amount of feet further back, not like the picture we saw. So,
I'm really torn because for a while I had neighbors with young children that had a trampoline in the backyard. So the kids would go up above the fence and come back down, up, and part of life, no problem. To single out skate ramps as opposed to basketball hoops or trampolines gives me hesitation. But I lean more towards the CUP process with as minimal a fee as possible. That's reasonable.
If I could, there's probably one other idea that we were just talking about that you could consider that's not presented tonight, and that would be the idea of creating an increased setback requirement for these types of uses. So you could do it in your backyard, but perhaps you couldn't do it within a certain amount of feet. I'm not quite sure it looked pretty close in the picture, so I'm not 100% sure how close it was in his backyard, but if it had to be 20 feet away, as an example,
I think that's a
then
great
the
idea.
impact might not be as significant.
And included in that, I think that we could probably recommend a minimum lot size. That would cover both bases.
Yeah.
Right. The code enforcement that we did on this project, the skate ramp is 6 feet away from the fence.
Sorry, I'm new to this. I support the CUP. I think it lets us look at each application on a case-by-case basis to look at the unique assets of the property. And it lets us have community input. We can hear what the neighbors think about it. And it lets us write up unique conditions. And I think the ordinance update was thoughtfully written, and it has, good ideas. So I think I don't want to prohibit people from having nice little skate ramps in their backyards, but I'm thinking of the neighbors of owners of skate ramps as well. So I can support the conditional use permit. The fee is steep, but maybe we can work on that part.
Can we recommend a conditional use permit to the city council without saying anything about a fee, and just let the city council work that out, or should we also propose a fee reduction?
I would recommend just moving, if you want to move forward, just moving it forward without a recommendation on the fee.
So,
Either way.
yeah.
You can, so your ability is to do whatever you want, right? You're a recommending body, and you get to determine what you want to recommend. So the gamut is open to you. So you can be as narrow or as broad as you want.
I mean, I can kind of get I have total sympathy for the neighbors of the skate ramps. I really actually like the idea of the increased setback limit, because to me that solves a major problem coming from the neighbors where they can't look into your backyard. I mean, I guess I would especially understand, like, if you had young children in swimsuits and teenage boys. I mean, I would feel uncomfortable in that situation, but without necessarily going above and beyond to really dictate what someone's doing on their own property. I think setting it back with the height limit, because would we be able to do a height limit with that as well? I think that's a really good solution that doesn't, get us really tied up. And because I definitely wouldn't want the general fund paying for part of the conditional use permit on this. I mean, that's basically the city now paying for your neighbor to get a skate ramp, and I don't think that's really a solution that anyone that doesn't want skate ramps wants anyway. But I mean, I think a height limit combined with a limit that keeps it away from the fence line, I mean, in that case, you're not really obstructing your neighbor, and the person with the skate ramp can be happy too. And I was looking in the pictures, this person has a pool too. So I mean, in that case, I don't think they would necessarily be able to have one. They probably wouldn't be able to have it that far over, but that's kind of a limitation of whatever property you have. So
Would you like to make a motion?
I would like to motion that we recommend that the city council does a height limitation and a setback increase on skate ramps.
So just for clarification on your motion, do you have a specific requirement in terms of the setback? What I had mentioned is something in the 20-foot basis, but it can be whatever you would want.
I think the height sticking at 6, which was in what was going to do the conditional use permit, is probably reasonable. I would be open to hear what everyone thinks. If it's right now, the setback limit is 6 feet.
Yes, the setback is currently 6 feet. Yeah.
Does anyone have an engineering degree that can?
If we double it, 12 feet, that's quite a ways in. 12
Yeah.
feet. 12 feet?
Well, we
Does that
treat it
sound
as
right?
an accessory structure, and so it's 6 feet from the property.
So yeah, double it.
Restate the motion.
I will try and do the same. So I motion that we limit the height of skate ramps or recommend that the height of skate ramps be limited to 6 feet, not including guardrails, and that the setback limit be moved from 6 feet to 12 feet.
I'll
Have a
second
second?
that.
We have a motion and a second. Mine is on.
Go ahead.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to recommend to the city council that the height limit on the skate ramps be 6 feet, not including the handrails, and the setback be increased from 6 feet to 12 feet from the property line. Do I have a vote?
By our Chair Dynan,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ball,
Nay.
Yes.
Commissioner Fenrick, okay. And Commissioner Stewart
Yes.
and Commissioner Hughes.
Yes.
So that passes for one.
Thank you all. Next on the agenda is the Planning Commission workshop concerning the California Environmental Quality Act.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Tonight, we have Rowan Acosta of J.B. Anderson Land Use Planning. He's been working as a consultant with the city, and he will be doing the presentation for you. Thank you, Roman.
Thank you, Donna. Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Roman Acosta. I work for J.B. Anderson Planning, and I also am a contract planner here in Riverbank. So tonight, I'm going to give you a brief as possible overview of the California Environmental Quality Act. This is a very extensive topic that I could talk for hours, but I'll try and keep it to a minimum. So what is CEQA? That is the California Environmental Quality Act. So CEQA is kind of California's response to NEPA, and NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. And CEQA was passed in 1970 as a response to NEPA. So the purpose of CEQA is to kind of give decision makers and the public a overview of the potential environmental impacts a particular project could have on the environment. The focus of CEQA is to prevent and minimize damage to the environment through mitigation measures, and to work with applicants to try and get the impact on the environment as small as possible. Some more purposes of CEQA is to enhance public participation. There is a lot of noticing, there's a lot of consultation, there's a lot of interagency coordination in response to CEQA, and the focus of this is to try and get as much comments as possible on a particular project and how the environment could be potentially affected. So there's three main agencies that work with CEQA, and the first is the lead agency. So in many of the projects that we work with, the city of Riverbank would be the lead agency. And there's also kind of the second tier is the responsible agency. So the responsible agency would be the agency that has some approval authority over the project. An example of this would be the State Lands Commission. And then lastly, there's a trustee agency, which is kind of the third tier. An example of this would be the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So if they have jurisdiction over any jurisdictional waters, or if there's any type of biological resources that they are concerned with, they will comment on it. So the process of CEQA, there's 4 phases. So first is kind of a preliminary review of the project to try and iron down a project description. Once we have a project description, we move on to an initial study. And the purpose of the initial study is the initial study will go through each potential topic that can have an impact on the environment, and the lead agency is required to do an analysis. And the result, there's 3 potential results of that initial study. There could be either a negative declaration, which states that the project will have a negative impact on the environment, meaning that it won't have an effect. There's a mitigated negative declaration, which means that the project without mitigation would have a potentially significant impact, but with mitigation, it goes down to that less than significant level. And then the third one is the most expansive one. That's a full-on EIR, which is a very expansive document, which I'll kind of go over in detail a little later. So the preliminary review is kind of just staff ironing down the project description and trying to get a grasp on whether or not the project will trigger an initial study. So here's kind of a quick little chart which kind of breaks down if a project were to trigger CEQA or not. So legislative action, which would be a general plan amendment, a zoning ordinance, something like that would be subject to CEQA. A quasi-judicial, which would be a zoning variance, conditional use permit, is subject to CEQA. But a ministerial action, meaning like a building permit, there's no CEQA analysis required for a building permit. So those are the three potentially things that can trigger CEQA. Exemptions, this is a big one that we work with a lot, is say we get a project, we get the project description ironed out. Before we do initial study, there could be an exemption that's triggered. So some common exemptions that are used are an infill development project. CEQA allows the analysis to be at a much smaller level if there's an exemption. There's also statutory exemptions, which are very uncommon, but it was seen when LA held the Olympics. They got a free pass on CEQA because they needed to get stuff built fast. And as you'll see, with CEQA, everything takes quite a bit of time. And then the third one is a general rule. So if the project description's ironed out and the lead agency has determined that the general rule applies, that means that the project can't have a potentially significant impact on the environment, and therefore further CEQA review would not be required. So kind of a local example was what we went through on the Del Rio Theater. They got an entitlement called a architectural site plan review. It was defined as a project under CEQA, but because it was an infill piece, it was able to be exempt. And infill is defined as, so say something is developed on 3 sides and there's a blank plot of land, that would be considered infill. So it has to have urban uses on all 3 sides. So the initial study analyzes the environmental impacts. CEQA releases a checklist, so staff will go through the checklist and they will determine if each resource would be impacted or could be impacted, and they make a determination based on that. And the checklist includes a variety of topics, including aesthetics, biological resources, cultural resources, etc. The thresholds of significance on that checklist are not defined by the state. They are more defined by the lead agency. And if the lead agency determines that there is a substantial effect on the environment, the lead agency must prepare an environmental impact report. So an example of this is an example of a mitigated negative declaration was River Run, which is a development of 51 lots in East Riverbank. An initial study was prepared, and what that initial study showed was that with mitigation measures, the project had a less significant impact on the environment. So some of the impacts that were further analyzed, of which mitigation measures were applied, were biological resources, traffic, and public utilities. So every initial study, it's a type of analysis that's done, but it's released to the public, and the public always has a chance to comment. So say, someone has lived in their land for years and they have some information that would help us determine the effect the project could have on the environment. We solicit their comments and hope for them to comment so we can make a better determination as a lead agency. And this review is 20 to 30 days. And it's noticed by all the property owners in the area to solicit comments. So the environmental impact report is a much more expansive topic. It's basically, it's an initial study on steroids. Each individual topic goes through a ton of analysis. And some of the areas that the analysis goes through is aesthetics, agricultural resources, cultural resources, geology and soils, greenhouse gases, hydrology, land use planning, noise, population and housing, public services, recreation, tribal cultural resources, and utilities and service systems. So you can get an idea. It's a pretty vast document with a very high level of analysis. And then once the EIR, the draft EIR is prepared, it's circulated for a public review, similar to the initial study, but just on a much larger scale. And this review is to solicit comments from other outside agencies, property owners, residents, anybody can comment really. So after all the comments are received, that is encapsulated into a final EIR, which is then again released to the public for review and comment. So once a project's considered, usually with projects that trigger initial study, they'll be hand in hand. So you'll see the project, and then you'll also see the CEQA document running with the project. And this is just to show that the environmental analysis was completed by the lead agency and that the affected agencies had the chance to comment, and the public, of course, as always, has the chance to comment. After the project is approved or not approved, the NOD is filed, and that's usually done within 5 days of the decision. And I'm here for any questions, if anyone has any. Thank you.
NOD. What's an NOD?
Oh, sorry, it's a notice of determination, which basically says that the decision-making body has made a determination of whether or not a project has a significant level or less significant level or anything like that.
It sounds like most of this is done internally with the lead agency.
Yes, it is.
By your group, your company?
We do offer those services, but there also is a lot of other environmental companies that offer the services.
And at the end of the day, is there some other higher power that has to approve the final document? This is okay, you can proceed with your project?
I believe the decision-making body does, so the lead agency would approve that document.
All within the city of Riverbank?
Yes.
City council.
City council, yes.
But when they go and they circulate this document, it goes out to a number of different jurisdictions. So you're looking at Caltrans, you might be looking at the Autobahn Society that could pick it up. So it goes up to a lot of different people, and they provide comments. And then when we develop, like for instance, an EIR, then we respond to those comments. And so that would be something that Roman's group would do. They develop, and for the city, they would develop the response to the comments and the final documentation and the narrative. And those things, you know, an EIR is probably on today's age about, 1.5 to 2 inches thick. So
But when
double-sided.
when we're saying final decision-making body, that's the city council. So they're the ones, like, all this information comes in, but they're the ones who make the final decision on, okay, this is still worth it to move along or not. Is that correct?
Well,
On most things, the answer is yes.
Okay.
So it depends.
I
It
guess-
depends on what level of review you're talking about. So, for instance, if you have you'll have like a conditional use permit for a daycare, as an example. That won't go past this unless it's appealed up to the city council. So there's environmental review that's involved in there. But if it's like a really large project that has a development agreement attached to it, that's got to go to the city council, and they would be the final decision-making body. So it depends on the nature of the approval being sought. The bigger it is, the more likely it's to go to council.
Okay.
I guess the reason I paused is because the environmental document actually comes to staff first. And working with the consultants, we determine, have we done everything that we needed to do? Is it time to move on to planning commission and city council? So we have kind of a soft approval through staff before it actually goes to the approving body.
Any other questions?
And just to kind of throw this out there, the main biology stuff that we look at is our developers have to deal with Swainson's hawk, both foraging and nesting sites. That can even stop a construction project if there's babies in the nest. And another one we look at is the valley elderberry longhorn beetle, which you don't really see the beetle, but you look for the elderberry bushes to see if the beetle's there. And then you have to protect those beetles or those bushes during construction. Those are about our two biggest, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roman.
Moving along, planning commissioner comments. You have any comments from any of the commissioners? I've got one.
Okay.
I went to the open house at Flavors.
Oh,
Donna sent out an email. I was met by two very large security guards, one of which was very polite and nice and allowed me entry. It was a clean, well-run shop. I guess, Donna, you were there.
mhm.
Supposedly, it's got 54 cameras in the selling area. I didn't ask to see the other end where the cameras were monitored. And supposedly, they're monitored not only on-site, but off-site. And they were, as far as I know, they're open at this point in time.
Yes, they did have a soft opening, although there's still a few things that they want to do. For example, most of their lighting fixtures hadn't come in yet, so they just have the standard kind of bare tubes up there, but they are expecting a chandelier for the center of the business, and they hope to set the bar for other dispensaries in the area.
Did they ID you?
No, they just asked me who I was and who I was with, and I said the planning commission. They said, come right in.
Yes, they did give tours for 2 days. But now I believe if you show up there, you have to sign up and either show them your doctor's card, your medical card to get the medical cannabis without taxes, or you could go in recreationally once you sign up as well.
And there is an age difference. If you have a medical card, you can be 18 to get in. Everyone else has got to be 21. Okay. County referral correspondence information. Information only.
Okay. Okay, we'll leave that staff comments next. Okay. Staff comments. I did not have an item at the last city council meeting update, so I'm actually going to give that a few minutes of time to our city attorney here, Doug, to talk to you about the Brown Act.
Well, I'm not going to go too much in depth today, but I just wanted to make sure that you all got one of the little handbooks that we have. It's meant to be a pocket guide, so it's meant to be brief in nature. So I will tell you that the law is much more expansive than that, and there's probably a lot of questions, particularly because we have a lot of new commissioners. I wanted you to know that you can feel free to call our office and ask any questions that you have. Our goal, primarily for the city, is to do risk management, and so part of managing that risk is to make sure that you conform with the law, and it's hard to conform with laws that you don't even know exist. So, with that, feel free to look through it, call with any questions that you have. All of our phone numbers and cell phone numbers are also available on our website, so if there's somebody other than me, if you want somebody who has hair to talk to, then
What's your website?
there's plenty on our website. So
Your website.
Churchwell, CHURCHWELL, and then White, WHITE.com.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
So, and then just go under people.
I took exception to that hair thing.
I know. I just said if that was your preference, right? I've lived with it for a while. So.
You're not alone.
No, I know.
Does anyone have any questions since we do have Doug here? Okay, then we can give it some thought and get back to him, and you're also free to call us as well.
Yep.
Okay, item 8.2, Planning Commissioner Trainings. League of Cities, Monterey, April 4th through 6th. I want to thank Janet for all her hard work getting everybody signed up, getting the per diems and the gas money and the rooms. Takes a lot of work and a lot of organizing, and then when you have commissioners come and go and you're switching them all, I think she did a heck of a job, and so thank you, Janet. If you have any questions on that as well, we'd be happy to help you with that. And then item 8.3, and then number 2, the Stanislaus County Planning Directors has an annual training, and this is their 40th this year. It was supposed to be held on Saturday, April 14th from 9 to 12, and they've had to postpone it. They've had some issues with the speakers, and so they decided to put it off, and plus the fact that it was so close to the Monterey trip. You'd be going to a conference one week and then this other training the weekend after. So this will give you a little bit of a break, and I will get back to you with the new date and time. And then there will be even more trainings coming your way. So some of the upcoming workshop trainings will involve development agreements, specific plans. In fact, we have a couple items coming up to you probably later this year with the approval of a specific plan, which actually has an EIR with it. So that'll be some fun reading. And then we'll probably talk some about the zoning code as well. So if there are any topics, like for example, when we go to Monterey, you go to a session, there's a topic that piques your interest that you think we should discuss as a group, I'd be more than happy to take some of your suggestions and look at some future trainings.
If I could just add on, something you just triggered something in my memory. So we'll also be doing, our firm offers free sexual harassment and AB 1, 2, 3, 4 training, which is basically ethics. As appointed officials, you're all required to do that, as well as complete your Form 700, which those who are renewing, like Ms. Stewart, will be doing that, and the rest of you will be doing the assuming office one. So if you have questions about that, talk to staff, and they can get you. And then once we have the dates on the ethics training and sexual harassment training, we'll let you know. But each of them is 2 hours, and unfortunately, you're required to sit through them. But it's
The Form 700, the financial disclosure?
it is statement of economic interest. Yep.
I was just going to say, some of our folks have really jumped the gun and gone online to do it. And then there is also a session in Monterey through League of Cities coming up too that you can take it there.
Okay. Well, the next regular planning commission meeting is going to be April 17th, 2018. And having said that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Good job, John. To be just thrown into it. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Doug, for coming over. I know you've had quite